Hey everyone, Detective Brooks here. This story will make you look at your life from a completely different perspective. You can't even imagine the events that took place in this wonderful family. Christina Schoen was born in September 1976 in the American city of New Orleans. Her parents dedicated their lives to military service, so the family often had to relocate, moving from one military base to another, both within the country and abroad. These constant changes of environment allowed the girl to learn about the world from a young age, meet new people and their cultures, and develop communication skills. At the same time, the need to constantly adapt to new living conditions inevitably caused stress. However, Christina seemed to overcome any difficulties with ease, only tempering her character. Eventually, the family settled in the town of Biloxi, Mississippi. It was here, at a more conscious age, that Christina discovered her love for the culinary arts. The teenage girl enjoyed cooking, and it became her way of supporting her parents, who, due to their busy work schedules, did not always have the opportunity to prepare food themselves. Christina eagerly studied cooking magazines and newspapers, mastering the secrets of the craft, and later even began to create her own unique dishes. However, cooking was not the girl's only passion. After graduating from high school, on the advice of her parents, she decided to continue her education and moved to Los Angeles, where she enrolled in the Academy of Dramatic Arts. During her studies, which ended in 2000, Christina repeatedly participated in theatrical productions and even managed to star in episodic roles in Hollywood films, in particular, as a stuntwoman in the movie Terminator: Genisys. Christina stood out not only for her beauty, but also for her athletic physique, sociability, self-confidence, and diverse talents. She easily found common ground with others and knew how to present herself in the best light. In her free time, the girl preferred active outdoor recreation. Over time, this hobby grew into something more. Christina realized what she wanted to do in life. Thanks to her dedication to a healthy lifestyle, she decided to devote herself to helping other people, motivating them to follow proper nutrition and engage in fitness. Christina herself served as a living example that such an approach is the key to a harmonious life. The girl actively promoted the rejection of bad habits. It was these interests which completely captivated Christina in adulthood that prompted her to dream of her own catering company. She planned to organize catering at themed events and parties, offering guests healthy and delicious dishes, a format typical for the early 2000s. In 2005, Christina officially registered her business and enthusiastically immersed herself in work. Through her business, she actively popularized the ideas of using environmentally friendly products and materials, positioning her own brand as completely natural and beneficial. Cristie had even more ambitious plans. Another of her cherished dreams was to create a self-sufficient farm that could provide people with food with minimal interference in natural processes. The girl devoted many years to developing these ideas while continuing to pursue her other favorite activities. In 2012, Cristie became a finalist in the 8th season of a popular television cooking show, but she failed to win. She usually accepted defeat with dignity, but this time she felt that she had been treated unfairly. In her opinion, the jury misunderstood and misjudged her original approach to cooking, which caused her strong indignation. However, Cristie was not going to give up and was determined to prove to everyone that she was capable of pursuing her goal despite the obstacles. Later, the unpleasant impressions from this incident faded, and Cristie threw herself into her usual affairs with renewed vigor. She continued to develop her catering business while participating in the filming of other culinary television programs. It was on one of these projects that fate brought her together with Joseph Coate, who was engaged in casting actors and participants for various shows. The man fell in love with the charming blonde at first sight. At first, a friendly relationship developed between them, which gradually grew into a mutual romantic attraction. Joseph fully supported Cristie and believed in the great prospects of her ideas and aspirations. Later, the couple decided to start a new life together and fulfill their dream of having their own farm. They left California, sold the catering company, and moved to the cozy town of Lester in North Carolina, with a population of just under 12,000 people. At that time, the couple was already planning to start a family, so they took care to purchase a spacious plot of land. They became the owners of 36 acres, which was ideal for building the farm of their dreams and fulfilling their plans for the future, including having children. In September 2014, the couple officially formalized their relationship by exchanging wedding vows at the local community center, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Despite the move, Joseph continued to work remotely in television. From the outside, the Koch couple seemed like the perfect match, both bright, ambitious, and harmoniously complementing each other. Thanks to their talents, they had grand plans for the future. At the beginning of 2015, their lives changed dramatically. Christy became pregnant, and the couple eagerly awaited the birth of their firstborn, a girl they decided to name Skylar. It seemed that everything in their life was going as well as possible. The young family was actively preparing for the new addition, as Christy's pregnancy had already reached the 5th month. However, this story will not have a happy ending. The idyll lasted only until March 2015, when worried relatives suddenly found it impossible to contact either 38-year-old Christy or 45-year-old Joseph by phone. The calendar showed March 15, 2015, when the alarmed relatives of Joseph and Christy had been trying in vain to reach the couple by phone for several days in a row. All their attempts to contact them by phone proved futile. Since the relatives lived a considerable distance from the couple's home, they were unable to visit in person and check if everything was all right with the young family. So they turned to Cecilia, a close friend of Christy's who lived nearby, for help. The girl agreed to visit the couple's house to find out the reasons for their silence. Upon arriving at the scene, Cecilia was alarmed by the oppressive silence that reigned around. Joseph and Christy's cars were parked in the yard, but the owners themselves did not respond to knocking on the door or loud calls. Looking through the windows, her friend could not see any signs of the presence of either the husband or the wife. There was an eerie impression that they had simply vanished into thin air. The situation seemed extremely strange because their beloved dogs remained inside the house. Christy treated her pets like children and would never leave them unattended under any circumstances. Even in the case of short-term trips on business, she always made sure to arrange for someone to take care of the animals. However, this time, what was happening did not fit at all with the usual way of life of the young couple. According to their plans, Christy had no scheduled trips for that date. At 5 months pregnant, the woman led a predominantly domestic lifestyle and rarely left the confines of her own home. After carefully examining the house, Cecilia noticed signs of a break-in on the back door, which she immediately reported to the relatives of the missing couple. After that, Christy's parents did not hesitate to file a missing persons report with the police regarding their daughter and son-in-law. When the patrol officers arrived on the call, they found the doors open and made sure that no one was inside. The law enforcement officers suspected that the couple might have been victims of abduction, so the house was immediately sealed off to preserve potential evidence. In order to get at least some clue, the detectives made a request to the mobile operator regarding incoming and outgoing calls from the missing couple's phones. It turned out that in recent days, Joseph and Christy had not made any calls, which only confirmed the worst fears of their loved ones. The last recorded calls were dated March 10 and 11, and none of them aroused suspicion. The couple communicated exclusively with friends and relatives. A thorough inspection of the scene revealed traces in the house that indicated an intrusion and probable abduction of the owners. Some valuables had disappeared, but no significant clues were found that would shed light on the identity of the perpetrator. Unfortunately, the criminal did not leave behind any fingerprints or biological traces. The investigation, having barely begun, was already reaching a dead end. The news of this event shook the small community of the town. Neighbors began actively discussing among themselves possible versions of what could have happened to the successful and attractive couple. Some of them recalled how on March 13 they saw a stranger throwing an extremely bulky and heavy-looking black bag into a garbage container near the house of the missing couple, after which he quickly walked away. Unfortunately, the garbage from the bins was soon taken out, so it was no longer possible to examine the contents of the mysterious bag. The identity of the man who disposed of the garbage bag was quickly established. He turned out to be 36-year-old Robert Owens, who lived near the Koch couple's home and worked various odd jobs, including in the yard of the missing couple. In addition, he was a close friend of Christy and Joseph, often communicated with them, and was even a guest at their wedding. This information attracted the close attention of the investigators, and on March 16, Robert was called in for questioning. However, at the police station, he firmly denied any involvement in the disappearance of his friends. Meanwhile, while the suspect was being interrogated, the police managed to find the same garbage bag that the man had thrown away near the house of the missing couple. Its contents turned out to be quite telling. Charred fragments of things, some of which resembled the remains of Christy and Joseph's clothes. The find only heightened the detectives' suspicions about Robert's possible involvement in the crime. When the investigators informed Robert about the discovery of the garbage bag, he instantly became confused and began to get tangled up in his own testimony. Eventually, under the pressure of the evidence, the man confessed to the crime. According to him, on March 12, 2015, he was heading to Joseph's house, intending to perform some work. But on the way, his car ended up in a ditch near the couple's house. Robert walked the rest of the way and asked his friends to help pull out his pickup truck. Cristie and Joseph readily agreed, and together they all headed to the scene of the incident. While the owners were pushing the car from the outside, their friend tried to start the engine and move from the spot. However, as Robert confessed, at some point, the unforeseeable happened. He accidentally ran over the couple. By pressing the gas pedal, the man hit Cristie and Joseph, causing them to fall and lose consciousness. In a panic, Robert accidentally pressed the gas again, running over his friends' bodies a second time. The suspect insisted that it was an accident, but at that moment, he was afraid that he would not be believed and would inevitably be accused of intentional murder. In the end, Robert made the fatal decision not to call the police or an ambulance. Cristie and Joseph were lying motionless and showing no signs of life, but instead of trying to help them, the man decided to get rid of the bodies and destroy all traces of the crime. He loaded the lifeless bodies of his friends into his pickup truck and took them to his own home. There, in the bathroom, Robert mutilated Joseph's body with an electric saw. He put the man's body parts in plastic bags and temporarily left Cristie's body in the bedroom before doing the same to her. After that, the killer tried to destroy the remains as much as possible by burning the body fragments in the stove located in his kitchen. Robert committed all these horrific actions in order to conceal the traces of the brutal crime. After listening to the chilling details of the confession, the detectives immediately went to the suspect's house with a search warrant. There, in the stove, they found severely burnt bone fragments belonging to Cristie and Joseph. Robert had not managed to completely get rid of the terrible evidence. In addition, traces of blood and biological material of the deceased couple were found on the electric saw, in the bathroom, bedroom, and on the kitchen stove. All these findings fully confirmed the truthfulness of Robert's confession regarding the dismemberment of the bodies. Without wasting time, that same night, the suspect was arrested. He was charged with the intentional murder of 2 people, as well as the unborn child, unlawful entry, and burglary. Robert did not deny his guilt in the crimes committed, but when the investigators asked him why he did not immediately report the incident to the police if it was an accident, he could not answer. His story seemed extremely unconvincing and raised reasonable doubts. The detectives did not believe the version about the accidental running over of the couple and suspected that Robert was trying to hide something. This prompted them to study the personality of the detainee more thoroughly. In the course of further investigation, law enforcement officers managed to establish Robert's probable involvement in another crime committed 15 years ago, when his close friend disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Delving into the suspect's past, the police stumbled upon another chilling secret of brutal murder with a similar modus operandi. Zebb Quinn, Robert's friend, was born in 1981. It seemed that this young man had a brilliant future ahead of him. While still in school, he enrolled in military training courses and planned to join the United States Air Force immediately after graduation. Zebb was characterized as a caring and friendly guy. At the time of his disappearance, he was working at a local Walmart supermarket. Zebb lived in the city of Asheville, North Carolina, where he met Robert Owens, the future killer of the Coat couple. One January evening in 2000, Zebb finished his work shift at 9 p.m. He was going to go on a short trip with his friend Robert so that he could buy a new car. However, Zebb did not return home that night. His mother had an uneasy feeling that something was wrong. The woman had good reason to believe that her son did not plan to leave home for long. After all, Zebb did not take with him his wallet with money, a change of clothes, or the solution for his contact lenses, which he could not do without. Everything indicated that he intended to return as soon as possible. However, neither the next morning nor even a day later, Zebb still did not return home. The alarmed mother of the young man turned to the police with a statement about her son's disappearance. But despite all the efforts of law enforcement officers, it was not possible to find any useful information about his whereabouts. The detectives carefully studied the surveillance camera recordings that could have captured the movements of the missing person on the day of his disappearance. However, Zebb was last seen on video only at 9:15 p.m. when he entered a small store with a stranger to buy a soft drink. Later, this mysterious companion was recognized as Robert Owens, the very person with whom Zebb went on that fateful trip. Surveillance cameras recorded Zebb getting into his light blue Mazda, while Robert settled behind the wheel of a Ford pickup truck. The cars left the parking lot one after the other, after which the young man's trail broke off. He seemed to have vanished into thin air. Naturally, the investigators had a number of questions for Robert, as he was the last one who communicated with a missing person and probably could shed light on his subsequent fate. During a conversation with detectives, Robert tried to recreate the events that took place after the cars disappeared from the camera's field of view. According to him, shortly after leaving the store, he and Zebb parted ways because Robert received a short message on his pager with a job offer. In order to discuss the potential order in more detail, the man was forced to leave for a while and find the nearest payphone. So he gave Zebb a conventional signal with his headlights, and both cars stopped on the side of the road. Robert explained the situation to his friend and asked him to wait a bit while he settled all the issues, after which he went about his business. As Robert claimed, he dealt with his affairs quite quickly, in about 10 minutes, and was already going to return to the place where he had left his friend. However, according to his own confession, it was not that simple. The man said that during that period, he was suffering from depression and was taking medications prescribed by a doctor, which sometimes caused him to have a depressed state and a somewhat distorted perception of reality. It seems that this is exactly what happened that fatal evening. Robert described his condition at that time as extremely agitated and confused, as if he was completely losing control of himself. According to the suspect's version, when he was approaching the agreed meeting place, he lost control of the vehicle and his pickup truck flew into a ditch. Despite all his attempts, Robert could not pull the car out on his own. However, realizing that he was near the place where Zebb was waiting for him, the man decided to walk the rest of the way. Trying once again to cope with the blocked vehicle, Robert suddenly noticed that a car very similar to his 18-year-old friend's car drove past him, but the driver did not stop or even slow down. Robert had no way to catch up with or pursue the car without his own vehicle. Thus, according to the suspect, he had no idea where Zebb could have gone and what had happened to him. The subsequent chronology of events in Robert's account seemed extremely vague and confused. It is only known that on the same night, he ended up in the hospital, allegedly due to an accident, which, however, was in no way connected with Zebb's disappearance at least. This is the version voiced by the man. However, no confirmation of his words could be found according to police reports. No accidents were recorded in the county that night. Robert claimed that as a result of the accident, he received quite serious injuries, broken ribs and a concussion. According to him, he sustained these injuries a few hours after Zebb's disappearance. The suspect's story revealed many gaps and inconsistencies, which gave the impression that he was simply making up details on the fly to confuse the police. Soon, Robert was recognized as the main suspect in this case, as he had no convincing alibi and was the last person who had contact with the missing young man. However, the investigators did not immediately manage to break Robert during interrogations to bring charges. They needed more substantial evidence than just suspicions. Therefore, the primary task was to find either the missing boy or at least his car. It is worth noting that in the early 2000s, the investigation of such crimes was much more difficult than it is today. Law enforcement officers did not have the technical capabilities to quickly establish the whereabouts of a suspect or victim or track their telephone conversations. Instant messaging services were also just beginning to gain popularity and were not under the supervision of special services. There were also very few street surveillance cameras. In fact, all hope was placed on random witnesses who could provide any information about the events of that evening. But unfortunately, none could be found. Later, new persons of interest were added to the list of suspects, among them Massey Taylor and her ex-boyfriend. As it turned out, Massey had started dating Zebb shortly before his mysterious disappearance. 2 weeks before these events, the young people accidentally met in one of the local restaurants and had been communicating ever since. At that time, the girl had just broken up with her previous boyfriend, Wesley Smith. Rumor had it that their relationship was not without manifestations of physical and psychological violence on the part of the ex-partner. According to witnesses, Zebb, having learned about Massey's problems with her former partner, expressed a desire to intervene and help the girl. One day, he even showed up at her work just at the moment when Wesley was there. The young man intended to personally talk to the offender of his new friend, as she was clearly not indifferent to him. A heated argument broke out between Zebb and Wesley, which nearly turned into a fight. Several eyewitnesses heard Massey's enraged ex-boyfriend openly threaten to settle scores with his rival. It was quite obvious that he had a motive to get rid of Zebb. However, during interrogations at the police station, both Massey and Wesley firmly denied any involvement in Zebb's disappearance. The alibis of both were thoroughly checked, and eventually, the investigation concluded that they were not involved in this case. Therefore, the investigation and search for the missing boy continued. 4 days after his disappearance, Zebb's abandoned light blue Mazda was found. One of the employees who worked with the boy's mother called her and reported that he had seen the familiar car in a parking lot near the hospital. The car had obviously been abandoned under strange circumstances. The headlights were still on, and the doors were unlocked. After carefully examining the interior of the car, police experts were able to find several personal belongings of the missing owner, including a plastic card for using payphones. Also found in the car were several empty drink bottles and an unknown man's jacket, which definitely did not belong to Zebb. It was not possible to establish who owned this item of clothing, which was lying on the back seat. Interestingly, an inscription made with women's lipstick was found on the windshield of the car. The detectives made every effort to analyze the collected evidence, but this did not yield the desired results. It was impossible to track where and when Zebb's phone card was last used. Experts could not find traces of DNA or fingerprints on any of the items found in the car that would belong to anyone other than the vehicle's owner. The police managed to find several witnesses who claimed to have seen a young girl behind the wheel of the Mazda. Judging by their descriptions, she looked very much like Massey Taylor, Zebb's girlfriend. However, it was not possible to prove her involvement in the events of that night, as Massey had a reliable alibi. Despite all the difficulties, one rather interesting fact did come to light during the investigation. Shortly before his disappearance, Zebb sent a mysterious message to his aunt's pager. Unfortunately, the woman was unable to view it right away, as she had just gone to dinner at the home of Massey's mother, with whom she was friends. This unfortunate coincidence prevented her from finding out what her nephew was trying to convey in the last hours before his disappearance. Returning late in the evening from her friend's house, Zebb's aunt discovered that her home had been robbed. The intruders had taken away many valuable items, including the same pager with the unknown message from her nephew. Therefore, the woman could no longer find out what the text contained. It is noteworthy that the police experts who worked at the crime scene could not find any fingerprints or even any clue that would indicate the identity of the burglar. It is quite possible that the thief acted in gloves, leaving no traces. Thus, the investigation reached a dead end, and no substantial information about Zebb's fate could be obtained. The case remained unsolved, and the young man was considered missing for a long 15 years. However, the investigators were convinced that it was Robert who was involved in his disappearance and most likely killed his friend. The situation changed radically only in 2015, when Robert was arrested on charges of murdering the married couple. During a thorough search of his home, police stumbled upon a strange find. Under a thick layer of concrete, they discovered a cavity containing solid fragments of organic origin, as well as particles of fabric and skin. Such a method of getting rid of physical evidence seemed extremely suspicious. The detectives instantly realized that these findings could shed light on the mystery of Zebb's disappearance, as it was quite likely that the discovered remains could belong to him. All the physical evidence was removed from the suspect's home and sent for examination. In addition to the mysterious bones, several other items were found that attracted the attention of investigators, in particular, a plastic bag with a white powder of unknown origin. Later, an examination showed that the substance was quicklime. Important testimony was also obtained from one of the detainees' relatives. He recalled that in the winter of 2000 or a little later, Robert was burning some garbage on his property, which emitted an extremely pungent and unpleasant odor that even then seemed extremely strange to the witness. Soon after, a concrete platform appeared in the same place, which did not fit into the overall landscape of the yard at all. When asked by neighbors, the owner replied that he planned to arrange a pond for fish farming. But this idea was never realized, and later it was completely forgotten. However, it is worth noting that it was under this platform that the police discovered the aforementioned cavity with the mysterious bones. The results of the forensic examination confirmed the worst fears of the investigation. The remains did indeed belong to Zebb Quinn, who had disappeared 15 years earlier. The case of the young man's murder was moved from a dead point, and on April 27, 2017, Robert Owens appeared in court on charges of committing this and other serious crimes. The defense of the defendant immediately began active attempts to justify the actions of their client and mitigate his guilt. The lawyers argued that Robert had mental disorders and problems with an adequate perception of reality caused by taking strong painkillers that a doctor had once prescribed for him. Moreover, in order to combat the side effects of these drugs, the man was prescribed even more medications, which ultimately only exacerbated his mental disorders. All this, according to the defenders, led to irrational behavior and the inability to fully control his own actions. In addition, the defense emphasized that the defendant suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. Due to such a line of Robert's lawyers, he could well have been found insane and sent for compulsory psychiatric treatment instead of a real term behind bars. So when the court session had been going on for more than 2 hours, the prosecutors decided to compromise and offer the accused a plea bargain. According to this agreement, the charges of first-degree intentional murder were removed from Robert, and instead, he was only charged with 2 episodes of second-degree murder and robbery. Thus, the defendant actually avoided responsibility even for the death of Christie's unborn child. Robert decided to accept these terms and fully admitted his guilt in the crimes charged against him. In the end, the court passed a sentence 74 years in prison with the right to parole no earlier than 60 years. When the defendant was given the last word, he addressed the families of his victims with assurances that he deeply regretted what he had done. Robert claimed that he was not really a bad person, and the deceased were his friends, whom he did not wish any harm at all. He said that it was all a tragic accident, nothing more. However, none of the defendant's excuses found a response from those present at the hearing. His version of events seemed completely absurd and implausible. Even if we take at face value the story about the accident and the unintentional double running over of the couple, Robert's subsequent actions raised many questions. After all, there was a possibility that the accident victims survived and needed immediate medical attention. However, instead of checking their condition and calling an ambulance, the man simply took the battered bodies home and cold-bloodedly mutilated them there. For his part, the medical examiner who worked on the case expressed doubts that the nature of the injuries of the deceased corresponded to the version of events voiced by Robert. True, given the poor preservation of the remains, the specialist could not reconstruct the circumstances of the couple's death with 100% certainty. The defendant himself could not in any way explain what motive prompted him to commit such cruel and inhuman acts. His belated apologies did not make any impression on the relatives of the murdered and did not make them soften their position. The families of Christy and Joseph did not hide their indignation and righteous anger. They wanted the killer to suffer behind prison walls until the end of his days, and after death, he would forever end up in the flames of hell. Their desire was not surprising, because even seasoned law enforcement officials called this crime one of the most chilling and disturbing in the entire history of their service in this small town. Despite the fact that the perpetrator of the tragedy was finally behind bars, the case did not end there. Detectives continued to work on the mysterious disappearance of Zebb Quinn, aiming to bring a new charge against Robert in this case, which had been in the archives of unsolved crimes for 15 years. In 2018, the defendant finally made an unexpected statement. Robert assured that he was not involved in the murder of his 18-year-old friend. At the same time, he revealed new details to the investigation that allegedly shed light on the true circumstances of that chilling event. According to Robert, Zebb's disappearance and death were orchestrated by his own uncle, Walter Jason Owens. The man allegedly personally developed a plan to rob and kill the trusting young man. To lure Zebb to the place of the massacre, the uncle, together with Robert, enticed the love-struck boy to the Uwharrie National Forest under the pretext of meeting his girlfriend Massie. It was probably a message about this date that Zebb sent to his aunt's pager shortly before his disappearance. However, at the appointed place, the deceived Romeo was not met by the embraces of his beloved, but by 2 armed men with criminal intentions. As Robert claimed, it was his uncle Walter who shot Zebb with a .22 caliber hunting rifle without hesitation, in order to deprive the boy of the opportunity to resist or seek help from the police. After that, the uncle allegedly mutilated the body into parts and then burned the remains. In this horrific story, an eerie analogy was clearly traced. Both relatives, it seems, got rid of the bodies of their victims in the same way. This detail only heightened suspicions about Robert's leading role in these atrocities. However, the defendant continued to insist on his own non-involvement in the murder of his friend. He said that only under pressure from his uncle did he become an unwitting accomplice in concealing the traces of the crime. Moreover, Robert assured that if the cops carefully examined the crime scene in the national park, they would surely find physical evidence that would confirm his testimony. The police officers immediately went to the specified area, but despite all their efforts, they could not find a single clue. Apparently, over the 15 years that had passed, natural processes and wild fauna had destroyed almost all possible traces of the bloody drama. Law enforcement officers failed to find even the used cartridges from the weapon mentioned by Robert at the scene. Of course, the most logical step in this situation would be to turn to Walter Owens for explanations, but unfortunately, this opportunity was lost forever. The uncle died of a heart attack back in 2017, so no one could confirm or refute Robert's testimony anymore. It seems that the investigation into the circumstances of Zebb's death reached the same dead end as the case of the murder of the Coat couple. Prosecutors who did not believe this latest version of the hardened criminal eventually decided to make a deal with the investigation. On July 25, 2022, Robert was offered to plead guilty to first-degree intentional murder of Zebb in exchange for leniency. The defendant accepted the terms of the agreement and, according to the verdict, received an additional 13 years in prison, which was added to his current term. Since then, Robert Owens has continued to serve his sentence in the Federal Correctional Institution in Madison County, North Carolina. Taking into account the fact that this unscrupulous criminal is the only witness to the deaths of 3 innocent people, it is quite likely that we will never know the whole truth about their deaths. However, for the general public, law enforcement officials unequivocally state that it is Robert Owens who is responsible for these terrible crimes, and he alone is guilty of what was committed. If you like this story, subscribe to the DBS channel, leave a like under the video, and share your thoughts in the comments and invite your friends to watch. Thank you very much for your attention. See you next time.